Welcome to ComSpark. We are live in Cambridge, Massachusetts at MIT, attending the Chief Data Officer Information Quality Symposium, where the world's top leaders in data have gathered. My name is Matthew Duramo. I am your guest host today. Joining me is Randy Bean, Randy Bean, founder and CEO of NewVantage Partners. Randy, appreciate the time today.
It's my pleasure, Matt.
How you doing?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. Well, hey, Randy, we've got a handful of questions put together. Sure. So if you don't mind, I think we're just going to kind of jump right into it.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So if I may, can you tell me what are some of the challenges facing the Chief Data Officer today?
Yeah, the short answer is just about everything. I've been involved with the inception of the Chief Data Officer role, actually the first Enterprise Chief Data Officer in the financial services industry was a partner of mine in my business for many years. So today we advise large financial services firms in particular on basically defining the Chief Data Officer role and getting value out of that role. But it's such a new and nascent role that organizations are really struggling in terms of both what are the characteristics that define a Chief Data Officer, what is the mission of the Chief Data Officer, where the Chief Data Officer should report in the organization. We do a survey every year. We started this about 8 years ago called, it's the Big Data and AI Executive Survey. And as part of that survey, we interview C-level executives from the largest financial services and life sciences firms. So for example, in 2019, 60% of the participants were Chief Data Officers. And among the major findings were that leading companies are struggling with data-driven business transformation. Cultural challenges remain the biggest obstacle to business adoption. And the Chief Data Officer role is evolving but ill-defined. Chief Data Officers may be well-equipped. And as an example of that, 67.9% of companies, of the companies surveyed now report having a Chief Data Officer in place. 7 years ago, it was only 12%, so you can see the rise there. But in terms of acceptance of the role, 38.2% of firms want an external change agent, basically to bring a fresh perspective. 32.4% want a company insider who knows the organization, knows the business. Another 48.1% on a different question see the CDO as having primary responsibility for data, while 28.4% see no single point of accountability. And in another question, 17.5% of executives view the CDO role as interim or unnecessary. So given this disparity of viewpoints in terms of the mandate, the qualifications, and the long-term vision for the Chief Data Officer role, there's many struggles that organizations are facing.
Sure. So being so new of a role, I guess, what is that defining success criteria for a Chief Data Officer?
Well, there is no defining success criteria thus far. The organization was initiated in part following the financial services crisis, at least in the context of financial services industry where most of these roles are. And in a sense, boards needed to check the box to say that they now had somebody who was responsible for data, who could address issues from a risk and regulatory compliance perspective. But beyond being able to say, now that we have somebody responsible, they hadn't really gone beyond that to think about what the role could be. So for example, many Chief Data Officers are doing what we call playing defense. In other words, they're responding just in terms of risk and regulatory requirements as opposed to playing offense. And offense would be innovation. So how can you use data to innovate in your business? How can you enter new markets? How can you bring products and services to market faster? How can you identify new customer segments? How can you bring customer self-service to bear? So many Chief Data Officers are stuck filling the traditional defensive role and are only beginning to branch into the offensive and more innovative capabilities.
Sure, well, that's great. One final question, and I think I might have heard a little bit of it in your response there. The long-term vision for the Chief Data Officer, primarily an offensive role?
Well, yes, that would be the clear mandate and the clear direction, but data is really a journey. It takes place over time. Organizations are trying to transform from legacy environments so they can be more data and digital driven, like the Googles and Amazons. And for legacy companies, this is really a struggle. And so it's not something that happens overnight in 2 years or 3 years. It takes the better part of a decade. So for many organizations, they're really trying to understand the potential of what the Chief Data Officer could be. And as mentioned, some organizations view it as a transitional role, which may phase out over time, because if you look at true data-driven organizations like a Google or an Amazon, they don't have a Chief Data Officer. Everybody basically embodies that role and fulfills that mission. So to some degree, by definition, if you're saying that you have a Chief Data Officer, to some degree, you're kind of saying that you're not data-driven.
Interesting. Well, I really appreciate your insights today, Randy. Appreciate it very much for your time.
Sure. Thank you. My pleasure.
For more information, please go ahead and visit ComSpark.tech. Thank you.